Well, Oregon football doesn't yet have a five-star commit in the 2024 recruiting cycle, but that's expected to change. And how many could they get? Time will tell. Here we
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, review wherever you listen to or watch the show. Appreciate all of you out there who have done so already. We're almost to 2,600 subs on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much for that, and hundreds more on podcast as well. Got my guy Max Torres here, host of the Ducks Dish podcast, covers Oregon for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. Great dude to talk recruiting with. And Max, let's hop right into it. The five-star players are the ones that always grab the most headlines, right? Because you can't get more than 5 stars. There's no such thing. I think you can be a 6-star kicker. I think that's it. But when you're talking about position players that are not special teamers like that, 5 stars are the most you can get. They get the most attention. Oregon's never had more than 3 in a single recruiting class. They don't have one yet, but I fully expect that to change. And by the way, that's kind of, I don't think demand is the right word, but like I'm saying that's a standard now based on what Lanning and Lupo and all these guys have done from a recruiting standpoint. We should routinely expect to see multiple 5 stars in a recruiting class.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely become the case in Eugene. The recruiting potential is being completely tapped into by Dan Lanning and this coaching staff, and they're trying to reach new heights that we haven't seen before in Eugene. And I think that the benchmark for that is a top 5 class, and it is completely doable. That's not to say it's going to be easy. There's some very highly contested battles for some of these top targets that I'm sure we're going to get into. But just with the work that they've put in, the visitors that they've already hosted, the visits that they're going to host this month, talking about that June 23rd weekend will play a pivotal role in if they're ultimately able to seal the deal with some of these top 5-star guys that they've been swinging for. And now it's time to kind of finish the job with a lot of these guys eyeing summer commitments.
So when you're talking about the 5-star names that Oregon fans should have on their radar, we've mentioned several here on the show. You're of course super tapped in on the recruiting beat, and if you haven't, started reading his stuff over at Ducks Digest, then by all means you should definitely do that because he's got great stuff over there all the time. But Brandon Baker, Elijah Rushing, Williams, the linebacker. I keep wanting to call him Justin Williams. I keep wanting to call him Dylan Williams. I don't really know why. I don't know where that came from. Maybe
that's another guy they're going after.
Oh, okay.
He's a linebacker too. He's out here in Long Beach.
Okay, so I'm not crazy. This is good. This is why I bring you on, to remind me that I'm not fully crazy, only partially. So those are some of the names that Oregon's been after, that they're maybe trending towards for some of these guys. Are there any other 5-star names, just focusing on those kids? There are plenty of other recruits the Ducks are interested in. Are there any other 5-star names that you've kind of heard Oregon should have on their radar for 2024?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we were kind of talking about this before we hit record. We were kind of setting up the show rundown and whatnot. And I think I kind of want to break it into 2 groups. 5 stars that I'm feeling, decent about, a couple that I think Oregon leads for, and then a couple of guys that Oregon's involved in, but I think that those battles have a little bit more, runway, more of a, more ground to cover. And maybe Oregon needs to kind of make up some, ground. So Elijah Rushing, definitely probably the easiest name that you can throw into that mix for Oregon. 5-star edge rusher out of Salpointe Catholic in Tucson, Arizona. He's going to be arriving in Eugene, depending on when this comes out, but he's supposed to start his official visit on Friday, June 2nd. So that is a really important official visit for Oregon. Really, he's the main official visitor that I'm aware of for that June 2nd weekend. So they're going to be able to put all of their focus on him, similar to the storyline we had when he had to reschedule that spring game visit. He didn't make it out for the spring game because of prom. They rolled that visit back, rolled it up, I guess, a week, and they were able to really focus on him. which was, I think, a benefit, honestly. And then you have Brandon Baker, 5-star offensive tackle out of Santa Ana Mater Dei. I put my prediction in for him, a little over or just about a week ago. Feeling really good about that one. Justin Williams, 5-star linebacker out of Conroe, Texas, Oak Ridge High School. Another really, really talented guy, taking like 6 trips to Eugene now, 5 or 6. He just scheduled his OV to Georgia for that June 23rd weekend, so that's a development. And then you also have Jordan Ross, edge rusher out of Alabama, another big name for Oregon. And then you also have Aiden Breland, also out of Mater Dei in this 2024 class. And I think that kind of rounds out the group that I'm feeling good to confident about. And I hope I tried to explain that. But maybe we can talk about some of those guys and then get into some of these other big names that are also 5 stars that Oregon's pursuing, but maybe they don't have the best standing with, from my understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's kind of what we'd set out for our roadmap when we came on to record here, and that's why we bring you on. Because, like I said, everybody, he is as tapped in as anybody on the recruiting show. We bring Brian on the show because he's got great insights on guys as well. But Mac's always my man for all that sort of stuff. But I want to talk numbers here for just a second, then we can get into some of those specific players and whatnot, and kind of what it would mean for the recruiting class writ large if you get these guys to commit. The most 5 stars we've ever seen commit to Oregon in any recruiting cycle is 3. That was in the 2020 class, not 2021, but in the 2020 class with Dante Manning, Noah Sewell, and Justin Flo. Of course, they've had different careers. Manning still on the roster, waiting to have that pop season. Sewell off to the NFL. Justin Flo, injury-riddled time at Oregon, off to Arizona. But I think from a numbers standpoint, Max, I don't really look too deep into Mateo losing a star at the very, very end of the recruiting cycle, because I watched him in the spring game and I was like, yeah, that looks like a 5-star kid to me. So there were 2 in the 2023 cycle, Jerion Dickey and Mateo. Going forward, I think that's depending on how this recruiting class goes and what this staff shows for their potential, and also what happens on the field, right, with results. I think 2 could be the baseline, and you could see a class. Maybe it'll be 2024, maybe it'll be 2025, but I think you could find a recruiting class with this staff and the way they've shown their propensity to recruit, where you're stacking up maybe 4 or 5 of these kids.
Yeah, no doubt. I think what you're kind of saying, and I agree with, is like 3 is kind of that sweet spot, or like maybe a baseline that you're starting with. That's not me saying, oh, I think Oregon's going to sign 3 or more. I don't want people to put words in my mouth, but I think 3 is a good starting point, right? Because 2 of those guys I feel really good about Oregon ultimately winning out for, Elijah Rushing and Brandon Baker. And then I think they're in an awesome spot, probably lead for Justin Williams, but it's hard to lean into that with a ton of confidence just because of who they're going against: Alabama, Georgia, and then you also have Jordan Ross. I think that Oregon took the lead in that recruitment after the spring game, and I think he's going to be getting out to take some trips this summer. Definitely want to get him back to Eugene, but that's not an easy pull all the way from across the country in SEC territory. And then you also have Aiden Breland, who's from a lot closer, closer to home for the Ducks, just down in Southern California, out in my neck of the woods. He's a guy that I think Oregon has really come on strong for in this class. So that's why I think that 3 is probably a good, starting point. But kind of echoing your point, I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of get into that 4 area and maybe beyond. And I don't think that they should be concerned that they don't have a 5-star commit right now, because they're building all this momentum with, lower rated guys. I don't know why I put air quotes on that. I think it's just because they are lower rated, but maybe some fans.
But they're not low rated players. These are
exactly.
still blue chip recruits they've been bringing in.
Exactly. So these are still very important guys that you're using, and you got to think about when it's happening. They just had a killer May, even pushed into 2025 with Sandman Thompson out of the state of Florida. He's an interior offensive lineman in the 25 class. So I think that, around the 3 range is probably a good starting point. And then, there's definitely room to push even farther. And, if you're getting closer to that 4, maybe 5 range, I think that's where you see Oregon creeping up on that top 5 class, like we talked about. And that's ultimately where they're shooting for, the best class in program history.
Yeah. And when your first full recruiting cycle, that'd be the 2023 class, had 2, and was very close to having 4, I think you look at 2 and say, that's That's kind of the baseline expectation that they've set here. But there are more guys that they can still go after and want to go after who we'll talk about. But we got to talk about FanDuel too, because it's America's #1 sports book. And with the NBA Finals underway, you got to make a fast break to FanDuel during the finals. Right now, new customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. They've got great promotions every day, safe, secure, super easy to use app with a great interface. Get paid instantly, and there's just no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Max. So Rushing and Baker are kind of the guys that, I've also been hearing Oregon's in the best position for. Williams is in there. But are there any other names that you could see in the 5-star ranks being a late riser to get Oregon, at least in the running down to the final 2 or 3?
Yeah, I think there are a number of guys in this 24 class that Oregon's still in the mix for. I think one of the big names is Colin Simmons, edge rusher out of Duncanville, Texas. He was supposed to come out to Oregon to visit for the spring game. That trip ultimately didn't happen. So I think a lot of fans on the surface are like, okay, Oregon have they lost ground there? I think that's a guy that Oregon does have, an uphill battle with, particularly because some of those big in-state programs, Texas A&M making a big push, LSU also been very heavily involved in that recruitment. But I think there's some reports out there that he's going to be making an official visit, or at least coming back to Oregon in June, or I should say in the summer rather. So I need to do a little bit of digging on my end there. But Oregon has really pushed into the state of Texas in a big way. And if they're able to get a guy like Justin Williams, maybe it's going to be easier to, say, hey, we got one of the best guys in your state. Why not team up with him, play for Dan Lanning, play for Tosh Lupoi in Eugene. But then you also have a couple other guys, Williams Nwaneri out of Lee's Summit North out in Missouri, Dan Lanning's home state.
Yep.
He is the #1 defensive lineman in this 2024 class, depending on what service you're looking at. I like to use 247. So he's going to be taking his official visit, I believe, in September is what I saw. So he's a guy who looks like he's pretty, locked in for drawing that recruitment out, or maybe going closer to National Signing Day in December. Other small note, Brandon Baker moved up his commitment timeline. I didn't read the story because it was behind a paywall, but I saw that headline and I wasn't surprised because I love where Oregon's at there. So little nugget there. But yeah, Williams Nwaneri, big time defensive lineman, taking 2 trips out to Eugene since Dan Lanning was hired. And you got to think that he's going to try to tap into those Missouri roots to make that one happen. And then a couple other names just to mention here, Spencer, David Stone, big-time defensive lineman. Again, like I've been talking about, Ducks are really going for some serious talent on the defensive line. He's out of IMG Academy, and he took a trip out to Eugene this spring. And then you also have Dylan Stewart, an edge rusher out of Washington, D.C. I don't really love where Oregon stands there. I think they're still going to stay involved, but I think you can maybe see him trending towards, a Georgia or Ohio State. And then a little bit of a newer name that I think maybe needs a little bit more attention is Terry Bussey, a 2024 athlete, 5-star guy out of Timpson, Texas, can play a little bit of running back too, if needed, or wide receiver. I think that I've been hearing that he's probably going to pop up on campus this summer, maybe even as soon as this month. So keep an eye out there for some of those guys. You got to keep kicking the tires and, keep talking to them if they're going to listen. And then if you get them out to Eugene for a visit, I mean, that's when you really, I think, can see things change, because like recruits can kind of flirt with their Oregon interest on social media, be like, oh, I want to come out to Eugene, or Oregon's super cool. But to me, I don't put too much stock in it until they actually show that interest by taking a visit, especially of the unofficial variety. I think that is really telling, because the school is not covering that trip. And, they're paying for that one on their own dime, their family's dime. And then that's just an interesting point, especially with official visits. That kind of structure is changing right now in college football.
Yeah, and the visit lineup that Oregon's got in the month of June is just loaded, right? All these guys scheduled at some point in time. You mentioned, a couple or maybe a little bit later, but the visitor lineup in June, I don't know if you've got it in front of you, Max, but it's a long list of blue chip guys. We're talking in the teens to 20 range of, players who are going to be rolling through Oregon's campus in June, because then July is the dead period, right? July is when you can see some commitments because you don't have visits and coaches, there are limits on when you can talk to them and all that sort of stuff. But Max, I'll ask you just real quick to tally up how many visits are rolling through to your knowledge in the month of June. But while you do that, because I know it can take a second to count live as we record the podcast, the reason that we're talking about these particular players is, yes, they are highly rated, highly coveted. No, they do not always work out. But Oregon, in their program's history, has landed 14 five-star players. And I'm just going to roll through these guys. And no, the hit rate is not 100%. It's not going to be 100% at any position at any point in time for literally anything, right? The NFL draft is not 100%. Recruiting is not 100%. That's just the way it goes. There's just a lot of factors at play. But to the people who, and I'm not saying Oregon fans do this, but certainly there are plenty of college football fans who feel this way, say things like, oh, stars don't matter and it's not everything. Like, it's not everything. But when your list of 5 stars include Kayvon Thibodeau, stud, Justin Flo, injuries, Haloti Ngata, stud, Jonathan Stewart, Noah Sewell, Cameron Colvin, DeAnthony Thomas, Josh Connerly, Eric Armstead, Canton Kamatule, who had an injury-riddled career as well and didn't really ever get on the field much for the Ducks, Thomas Tyner, Jurion Dickey, Lashe Seastrunk, and Dante Manning. If you were to make an all-time roster for Oregon in the last 20 years, Max, since recruiting really started being a thing, a high number of those players are going to be on there. And these are the sorts of guys that I think when you talk about trying to catch up to the Alabamas, Georgias, and when LSU is at their peak, those teams of the world, you have to be able to put together this sort of talent. You have to have those guys because they do. And that's always the biggest differentiator. And when people, anytime I hear the argument, oh, there you go, stars don't matter, right? I always ask those people 2 questions, and I make them actually answer the question, not just ask them rhetorically. Number 1, why do the best programs in college football care so much about getting the high star kids? And number 2, why can't Washington State beat Alabama? Those are the 2 questions. Like, at the end of the day, it does come down. Recruiting's not everything, but it is a big thing, right? And it's not the only thing, but if you don't have it, the ceiling on your program is limited. And I think getting these sorts of players is not a brand new phenomenon for Oregon necessarily, but talking about having, Oregon was that close to having 4 of them in this 2023 class. If they put together a class with a bunch of high 4s and 4 or 5 5-star kids, that's going to translate to being closer and closing the gap with those SEC programs.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And you gotta take your shots with those guys, like we've talked about. I feel like one of the best 5-star examples or 5-star recruitments with regard to Oregon is the Kayvon Thibodeau recruitment. Oregon was involved there, but what really set them apart was that visit for the Washington game, which I think that was the game when they when CJ Verdell had that touchdown run up the middle,
the walk off in overtime,
which was huge because Oregon was kind of down as a program, and I think that really kind of, not that they're back necessarily at that point, but that was a big hump for them to get over, especially to beat Washington again after getting the absolute brakes beaten off of them a couple years prior. The whole Jake Browning point game, the 70 piece at home, horrible. But that visit shook up Kayvon Thibodeau's recruitment and left such a big impression that Oregon just wasn't gonna end up losing that one. So yeah, I think the guys, you got to get those guys, and that is part of the reason that you don't see Washington State being able to contend with a program like Alabama. But it's also worth mentioning, Spencer, we were talking about this a bit before, hopefully I'm not jumping the gun, but it doesn't mean anything if you get these 5 stars and you don't develop them or they don't reach their potential, which I think it's on the coaching staff and it's on the player. It's a two-part thing. They have to live up to their expectation and potential. They have to put in the work, and the coaching staff also has to develop them. So, as great as it is to have all these 5-star signings, I think there is some value in it, some, a vote of faith, a vote of confidence in your program, but it doesn't mean a darn thing if they don't play for you and they're riding the bench or they end up transferring. That's just how it works in today's age of college football. So definitely worth mentioning that just from a realist standpoint. We just got to call it how it is. But to get to your question, 21 21 visits, at least on my my running story on Ducks Digest about official visitors expected on campus this month in June. There's a couple. I'm sure there's more guys than that. I'm positive in that. Some guys are kind of low key on social media and don't really announce it. And then, like I said, I can definitely do some more digging myself. But 21 is where we're at right now.
That's a pretty big number. That is a pretty substantial number, I would think, and is indicative of, what we've hinted at not so subtly many times here on the show, is that this staff is an absolute grinder of a staff. Like, they are busting their butts to recruit as high of a level, or at as high of a level as they possibly can. And hopefully that pays off with some of these big time kids. Because when you're looking at where Oregon's class stands right now, Max, it's 6th in the country. If you add 5 stars to the mix, you can see that go up another level, right? And you can push for the best class in school history. And does that automatically translate to wins? No, because to your point, kids have to be able to click at the college level. Kids have to be developed. But when these 5-star kids play at that sort of level where they do develop, it looks like Kayvon Thibodeau, who looked different and was different than everybody else. Like there have been some great edge rushers. There have been some great defensive linemen for Oregon. None of them were as dominant as KT. They just were not. DeForest Buckner was not. Eric Armstead was not. I think the only guy who's close probably is Haloti Ngata, but they're different players, right? Haloti's on the interior. Kayvon is on the edge. Haloti, by the way, also a 5-star guy. So I think that's a great point that, it's half the battle to get these sorts of kids. It's another battle to then get them to realize their full potential. Because look at a guy like Dante Manning. He comes into Oregon, and I'm frankly, when I think about what the expectations probably were, I wasn't hosting the show, of course, so I wasn't thinking about this stuff as deeply. But the expectations for Dante Manning coming out of high school, I probably would have been surprised if you told me, hey, going into 2023, Dante Manning's still going to be on the roster. I would have said, what do you, 2020, 21, 22, 3 years and he's gone to the NFL, right? And he does have those sorts of traits, but it hasn't clicked yet. And maybe it does for him this year. I'm not, getting my hopes up about that, because we've seen him year in and year out he's not a bad football player, by the way. He's just not at his full potential to where he's a shutdown, lockdown, explosive, big-time playmaking corner. Maybe this is the year. Second year with Lanning and Lupoy involved heavily there in the defense where he makes that sort of jump. I don't know. But there are two sides to all this recruiting stuff, to your point, which is you've got to be able to teach them how to play the game and maximize their talents, because that star rating is essentially an indication of what your physical traits are compared to your peers. And Manning's, by the way, are superior. He's got the most athleticism of anybody in that corner room. I don't know that there's really a close second at this point in time. It's the other stuff that he's still got to learn to develop to maximize his talent.
Yeah, I think that, he's a good example, because it's kind of like, he's, I don't know if middle of the road is the right way to describe it, but, the way you put it, he hasn't reached his full potential and hasn't lived up to expectation, specifically as it pertains to that 5-star billing. I think, a lot of people see 5-star and you expect them to play right away. And I don't think that that's an unreasonable expectation, but it's not always fair. And I think it kind of varies from case to case. Depends on the situation you're going into. If you have a room loaded with vets, it's going to be harder to break through. Or if you're going into a depleted room, the staff may have no choice but to put you out there. I think a little bit about the cornerback room when Thomas Graham and DeAndre Lenore were starting up their careers at Oregon. It was not very good. It was very thin, and they were thrown into the fire. And that was a rough season in 2017, I want to say it was. But, they ultimately ended up developing into some of the better cornerbacks that have come through Eugene in recent years.
They were foundational pieces of the best secondary Oregon's had probably in the last decade.
And that's what I was getting to. They took their licks early. They got thrown into the fire. Not the best true freshman seasons, but, it kind of accelerated their development in that way. And then, fast forward a couple of years and they're part of the best Oregon team that we've seen in recent years, certainly the best defense under Andy Avalos. And I think that Dan Lanning's trying to reignite some of that fire with some of these guys and then some in the 2024 class, excuse me. So that's why you see him going after these, big time talent guys. And I think that the defensive line and the linebacker room in particular are going to be where you ultimately see some of that payoff with these guys in this class.
Yeah. And last thing on this for today, before we wrap up, that I've noticed consistently when you're talking about the 5-star players, Oregon's recruiting every position, going for a balanced class, prioritizing their needs and that sort of stuff. But I noticed the identity that Dan Lanning is trying to establish kind of taking fold, right? When we're talking about 5-star players, it's not wide receivers, it's not running backs, it's not quarterbacks for the most part. It's offensive linemen, it's defensive linemen, it's linebackers. Heck, it's not even corners and safeties, really. I mean, there was the whole Peyton Bowen debacle a year ago, but for the most part, it's the trenches, right? I think Dan Lanning is trying to build this team in his vision, and that is be more physical, but also faster than the other teams. But I mean, think about all the 5-stars we've mentioned on this show. Brandon Baker, offensive lineman. Elijah Rushing, defensive lineman, edge player. Simmons, defensive line. David Stone, defensive line. Like, just keep going down the list. Williams is a linebacker. I think that's kind of what they're going for here when they look at these big-time players. Williams Nwaneri, number 1 defensive lineman. That's the kind of guy I think that they're shooting for more often than not, is when they go after a big-time recruit, it's going to be at one of those positions.
Yeah. No, you make a good point. And, they've gone after 5-stars at, other positions, in the past. Even just rewinding to 2023, you obviously got Jerion Dickey in the fold, but you're going after Richard Young, 5-star linebacker out of the state of Florida. Now he's headed to Alabama. And then even, more recently, I think that Oregon's really just made the realization that, you want to get those 5-stars at any position that you can. But where has Oregon been lacking? The trenches. You can get things done with, those 4-star guys, high 4-star guys in the secondary. Oregon's shown that, but they've shown that you can't get the product that you want necessarily, or it's a little bit harder to get to that, end product, those end goals and accomplishments, if you're not bringing in, a couple of those 5-star guys in the trenches. And they've done it on the offensive line plenty of times. You look at guys like Penei Sewell, recently. I actually don't know if he was a 5-star, but, one of those elite names on the offensive line.
Penei was a high 4.
Yeah. So they've done that. I think the talent on the here's the easiest way to put it. The caliber of talent that Oregon is recruiting and landing on the defensive line is catching up to what they've done on the offensive line. I think that's the easiest way to put it, is that, they've become a destination for elite offensive linemen under Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal. Oregon fans can thank them for doing that. They're going to continue to be a destination for elite offensive linemen. That's under Elite Terry. That's why I put in a prediction for Brandon Baker. That's why I feel good about Jaquan McRoy out of the state of Alabama, 2 bookend tackles. And then now, Tony Tuioti, Tosh Lapoy, Dan Lanning are saying, okay, that's cool. Watch us go to work. Let's get some elite guys of our own in the trenches, because that's where you're seeing Oregon falling short, getting after the quarterback, living in the backfield. They've shown that they can develop, a good run defense. But that's only half the battle, because your secondary is, scrambling for their lives, trying to, they're looking bad because the pressure, the quarterback's got all day back there. Michael Penix has all the time in the world to dice up that secondary and, hit you over the top, because guys can't get home getting after the quarterback. So that's why they're going after these elite guys on the defensive line, in that front 7 at the linebacker core as well. And, that's why they're taking priority. And I think that's also part of the reason, Spencer, that a lot of this class that you're seeing so far in 2024 is already coming on the offensive side, with guys like Jordan Anderson. You got both your quarterbacks in the fold already with Moga and Van Buren. I love the way that they're doing this, because now they can put more of their attention onto the defensive side of the ball. And that's where Lanning and Lapoy, the 2 heavy hitters, and then, got Demetrius Martin as well. They're like, okay, great job offense. Now it's time for us to come in and really make this push. I I don't know why I'm kind of just getting really excited as I say that, because like, we're going into the summer.
It's an exciting time.
June's
If you
going to be
look
a
at
heck
it,
of
you're
a
like,
month.
how can you not be excited about this stuff?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, yeah, it's cool because I don't know. I just love doing this. It's super fun. And, especially when you can kind of see some of the stuff coming as, I get more tapped in and whatnot. It's just really exciting because, covered the team for a long time. I feel like it's just another example of how Lanning, I think, is going to be that coach that gets them into the top 5 recruiting class, which, doing that one cycle is an awesome accomplishment. But if they want to get to the levels of the Bamas, the Georgias, the Ohio States, you got to do it every year. They're not there yet, but that's where they're trying to get, and I think that they're going to do it for the first time in 24.
This show is Locked On Ducks. Max Torres, though, is as locked in as anybody that I know. Absolutely, positively dialed. Max, always great talking to you, man.
Great talking to you, Spencer. Thanks for having me on, man. Always good to talk some Ducks.
Yes, indeed. Once again, everybody, no show on Monday. I got a travel situation on Sunday, so I'll be busy all day. Won't record a show, but back in your feeds on Tuesday. I will see you then. Appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend, and go Ducks.